Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends, a very warm welcome to the 40th annual conference of the Institute of Small Business and Entrepreneurship. For those of you who are not familiar with the Institute or are in fact new members, I would like to just give you a little brief background. The Institute is one of the longest standing networks of educators and researchers in the area of entrepreneurship and small business in the UK, and increasingly reaching out to our colleagues and friends across the European Union. And we seek to influence policy makers in this arena, and we seek also to inform and establish, insofar as we can, best practice for our colleagues who are entrepreneurial business practitioners. So we seek very definitely to be transformative and to be strongly influential through our research and our outreach to those constituencies. The theme, of course, immediately comes to mind when you think about the fact that we're talking about borders, prosperity, and the need for an entrepreneurial response to the many challenges that clearly are presented by that development. But I'd also want to, really alert you to the fact that bordered thinking is not just about Brexit. And these are issues, I hope, that will be given some consideration in many of the research papers that we see in the breakout sessions following this plenary. But listen, you haven't come to hear me. We have got a number of very exciting keynote speakers, and I would like very quickly to move to introducing them. But before I do, following this welcome that I'm offering you, I want to say or draw your attention to the fact that we have been successful really in pulling together what is a really fantastic conference as a consequence or because of the generous sponsorship that we have gotten from a number of organizations. And you can see just over here on that pop-up or pull-up, however we want to designate it, the numbers of sponsors that have attended to us. And I hope those of you that are in the room will forgive me if I don't go through the list of them, but it's so extensive that we are particularly grateful to them. These events cannot really happen unless we get that sort of support. I'd also like to draw your attention, while I have your attention, that downstairs in the exhibition hall there are a number of exhibitors who are presenting textbooks, research, output, which you and I are all contributing to. And I would urge you to go to those stands and explore and examine what those exhibitors are making available to us as a constituency of researchers and educators. Okay, without much further ado, it is my pleasure really to invite Professor Paddy Nixon, President of the Ulster University, to address you at this point and to effectively open our conference. Paddy, if you would. Professor Paddy Nixon.
There we go. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Paddy Nixon. As I've been introduced, I'm the Vice Chancellor and President of Ulster Unit. And as you can imagine, I'm a passionate advocate for the University and for Northern Ireland. So it's a genuine delight to welcome you here and to the Belfast Europa Hotel for the 40th annual conference for the Institute of Small Business and Entrepreneurship. Can I say thank you? I am delighted that you've chosen, the Institute's chosen Belfast as its location for the conference. It's a vibrant city, it's an energetic city, but it's also a forward-looking city, and one that's inherently entrepreneurial in character. It's got talented people, and it's one of the UK's top investment locations. So I think you couldn't have possibly picked a better place in the European context or even the global context to have the conversations about small and medium-sized enterprise, about competitiveness and entrepreneurship, because that is at the heart of what Northern Ireland is and aspires to be. I think it's, as I understand it, it's the fourth time that this conference has chosen this city, in 1985, 1995, and 2007. So obviously you've got a bit of a relationship here, and you come back not just for the conference, but obviously there's something drawing you back to this city. And like any country, Northern Ireland relies heavily on entrepreneurs and small businesses to boost and drive its economy, to provide employment. And as a relatively small country, we're heavily reliant on funding from Westminster, the government in London, and our public sector is very large. Therefore, we, more than most places, need our brightest and most talented people to think carefully about their career plans and not always to opt for the job in a large organization, whether it's private or public sector, but to choose the opportunity to start new businesses and build this community and this economy. And whilst those large businesses are essential for any economy and provide employment for a large number of people, it's the entrepreneurial spark of our individuals and small businesses that can really help transform this region and all regions and help them thrive. At Ulster University, at my university, we really genuinely value creative thinking and entrepreneurial practice. We actively encourage our staff and our students to come up with new ideas, new products, processes and services. And I can guarantee you, we've got an institution of approximately 28,000 students, and the vast majority of them will go on to work in small to medium-sized enterprises and to work and drive the economy here. So it's at the heart of our mission as Northern Ireland Civic University to be a central part of the social, economic and cultural growth of Northern Ireland. We have a world-class institution. I'm very proud of our business school and what it does in support of the small and medium-sized enterprises. And we've been growing our strategic intent in the university, asking a genuine question about what are global questions, what are the global challenges that the world faces that have particular local resonance, things that are really meaningful for us here, and for which we have the skills to try and address in a way that will help not just Northern Ireland, but the rest of the world. And I think we've picked in our business school area a number of really critical ones for which we have a really deep skill base. The future of small and medium-sized enterprises is actually at the heart of what we look at executive education in that context. Competitiveness and entrepreneurship as part of our economy, which is inherently linked to those small to medium-sized enterprises. And then we've picked a couple of other areas in agribusiness and agri-foods, particularly because those are businesses that are particularly particularly central to Northern Ireland's economy. And I know that the Institute is one of the UK's leading exponents of creative thinking, and through its academic and practitioner research is supporting small businesses and entrepreneurship on a global basis. So that's why I think it's particularly important that our partnership here today, and those of the other colleagues and institutions that have supported this, is really important. It puts us in the position of being able to influence and drive the thinking for the next generation of small and medium-sized enterprises. And I know that the Institute has made a significant contribution in terms of research into entrepreneurial business, venture capital, and small business development across the UK in a time informing and influencing business practice, practitioner learning, and policy information. And I'd also like, in launching the event today, just to offer a few thanks. The involvement of Ulster University staff in the Institute, Professor Porrick McGowan as its president, Tony Wall as its treasurer and co-academic chair of this conference, and Professor Barry Quinn taking charge of yesterday's doctoral day, not to mention its various academics who are presenting papers at this conference and the various departments from the university that have provided sponsorship, demonstrates that ISBE's global outlook fits well and fits neatly with Ulster University's global vision. Can I also say there's various bits. I was looking at the list of sponsors there, and I had these sort of like, how can I draw my family relationships into all of them, because University of Liverpool is my alma mater. My mother and all of her family come from Dundalk, and I know they're the co-sponsors of this event. So I'd also like to genuinely thank the co-hosts, Dundalk Institute of Technology, and particularly the co-academic chair, Professor Colette Henry, for your support in delivering this. The program and the range of papers being delivered is genuinely impressive, and I had a look to see what was going on, and I'm really quite stunned by the quality and the diversity of the papers. And combined with the quality of the plenary sessions, which I'm sure you will develop over the event, I'm confident that a strong collective contribution will be made by everybody here. But I'd like to finish by asking you to do something. I'd like you to enjoy Belfast and the region while you're here. I'd like you to talk to people. And in doing so, I'm confident you'll find a warm welcome, but more importantly, a people who are second to none in their abilities and their inventiveness. And as my mother used to say, when I used to come home from rugby and say I just scored a try, self-praise is no recommendation. We need passionate advocates for Northern Ireland who can attest to our talent, our warm welcome, our potential, and importantly, our determination to play a part in the global community and the global economy. So if you see that in us while you're here, and I'm sure you will, can you please leave and tell our story and really talk about the future of Northern Ireland as a player in the global economy. Have a wonderful conference, and thank you for the opportunity to open it. Have a great couple of days here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paddy. Appreciate those words and for your time here to launch this, to open this conference. Okay, the next speaker is representing to ask Lisa Toland if she would address the conference. She is Head of Economic Initiatives and International Relations in Belfast City Council, and this global perspective, I understand, is really important and at the heart of what the city is about at this time. Lisa.
Thanks very much, Pádraig. Okay, thanks very much, Pádraig, and to Paddy speaking previously. So, as you both mentioned, you're very welcome to Belfast, and I'm sure you'll have a productive, but also hopefully an enjoyable time over the next few days here. I know some of you have been here maybe for a day or two. You had some work that you were involved in yesterday. Don't know if any of you got a chance to go to our Twilight Market, but as I mentioned to Pádraig when we were looking at the planning, it's very good timing. So it's in the city's old market, St. George's Market. So we have it, it's on this evening as well, so not to interfere with your programme, but actually an interesting story of entrepreneurship and actually businesses that started at St. George's here are now trading globally. So it's part of what the city is trying to do in all of its infrastructure to support business development and growth. So as Paddy had mentioned, obviously it's been a few years since the conference has been to Belfast. I was involved with Ken last time around. It was a very different city. So Belfast is now a global city. We have a Lord Mayor this year who's 28 years old and whose theme for the year is Global Belfast. And she's very passionate about the fact that Belfast, as you'll see here, is a city where global brands are visible, but also a city that welcomes the world to the city, but also where we want to help our businesses to become global and to be trading internationally. So that's very much at the heart of our agenda within the city, and very much her drive for her year in office as well. So local government in Northern Ireland has changed significantly over the last particularly 2 or 3 years, and we now have a city plan for which the city has responsibility, and it is really about creating jobs, making it a city where people want to come and live but also to visit, but it also commits to its residents in terms of educational attainment and also quality of life as well. So it's a very rounded piece that the city has taken leadership on, but obviously, like everything else that you'll be involved in, we can't do it alone. So partnership is critical to all of that. But it is important to say it is an ambition for the city. It's a long-term plan and something collectively that we're working towards. And I suppose the economy is at the heart of that, clearly, because if the economy is working well and working well for all residents, then the city will be a success. And Belfast is a micro-business economy. And although we have those global brands there, the majority of our business base still continues to be made up by particularly micro businesses, not even small businesses. So there are a number of themes and priorities within what we call our community plan, the Belfast Agenda. So just to pick up on some of the issues related to your areas of work, under the theme of growing the economy, there are specific commitments around job creation, but also around business start. And there's other commitments there around foreign direct investment and infrastructure investment, as you see. Also under the theme of working and learning, it's around improving educational attainment for all of our residents. So we have some very good educational attainment, and our universities and colleges are critical to that. But we have some way to go in terms of economic and activity challenges as well. And city development. So if businesses are to come here and to grow here, we need the right infrastructure to allow them to do that. So we have commitments and ambitions there around the types of infrastructure that we think are critical to move the city forward. With regard to startup and growth, which I suppose is your area of interest, it's fair to say in Belfast there is a mixed picture. So we're not very good at startup numbers, and we have some way to go. But when businesses do start, they tend to survive, and they scale to a certain point, but scaling beyond that is a real challenge. So, you know, that points to challenges about the numbers, so the volume in the first place, but also the scaling and looking at new innovation and new markets that can help them grow. So I suppose that, in a nutshell, is probably the challenge, the enterprise challenge, or some of the enterprise challenge in the city. And as one of the players in that, those are some of the challenges that we are trying to deal with. And one of the investments that we have made to try to address that is in the Innovation Factory, which I think some of you may go to tomorrow as part of the visit. So, and in a sense, like most projects, the Innovation Factory was born a bit of opportunity and a bit of necessity. So the opportunity was that our councillors in 2012 committed to an investment plan really to look at how the city could ride out some of the economic challenges that it was facing. It allowed us, that investment allowed us to lever some European funding to look at how we could bring the city forward. And clearly, given some of the challenges that I identified, you know, growing the business base and growing an innovative business base was a challenge for us. But also parts of the city, you know, have not benefited from economic growth. And the site that we had identified and where Innovation Factory is now located had been an old factory for many years, but had closed down more than 15 years previously, and no development had happened there. And essentially, like most sites then, had become a bit of a magnet for antisocial behaviour. So, and that part of the city also suffered from low startup rates, even proportionately lower than other parts of the city. But it had the advantage of a new college building built adjacent to there. So things, you know, the concept of innovation and learning was starting to evolve. So we were successful in attracting the funding, and the Innovation Factory is now there, and it's performing very well against target. And Magella, who's the Innovation Director, will meet you tomorrow, and she can tell you some of the story around that. So, but I suppose we decided that if we were going to make a success of this, and given those challenges, it wasn't for the city to operate that. So we have an operator who works with the businesses, who is focused on business growth and business innovation. So I suppose the Innovation Factory captures some of our contribution to the enterprise challenge in the city. And this is just, so this is their kind of a screenshot of their website. This is the kind of image that we want to portray. So, and this, you know, it's Innovation Factory IF, so everything is what if, you know, and it's trying to encourage that concept of what if you could do that, and to create the ambition that nothing is beyond the realms of possibility for the businesses that are based there. But as I mentioned, it's not, the opportunity for us wasn't just about the business growth and the innovation. We also had a challenge in that part of the city around regeneration and inclusion. So this centre is more than a business centre for us. And I suppose that gives it challenges in some ways of operating, but at its core was a commitment to social regeneration as well. And again, hopefully you'll see that when you visit the centre, because this plaque is in the centre, so it sort of encapsulates everything that we're trying to do there. And as you will know, not all of those agendas line up at every stage, but our councillors and the council committed to this broad ambition of social regeneration in this part of the city and at that centre. And that's what the guys are working to deliver at the centre, and hopefully you'll see if you go there. In terms of impact, of course, it'll be about creating jobs and innovation and encouraging both local and foreign direct investment. And we've put some space there as kind of landing space for foreign direct investment businesses alongside our local companies. But it's also about acting as a catalyst for the development and regeneration of the rest of the site. So we have a 2-acre site as part of a wider 14-acre site. So there's a lot of redevelopment that has to happen, but we want to look at how that can be a catalyst for the development of the rest of the site, and also promoting and encouraging economic and social regeneration. So it was a commitment through our procurement process for the operator. It's then transferred down to their operating commitments and their supply chain developments. So it's really making sure that it's not about a physical centre, it's more about the wider development of the area. So in terms of today's conference and event, or of the next few days, and the theme of borders, prosperity and entrepreneurial responses, just to make the point that, as I've mentioned, enterprise and small business are at the heart of our city agenda. It's writ large there in terms of our commitments, and as a statutory responsibility for the city, it's now something that we're committed to and driving forward in partnership with other agencies, and we've done that by setting targets around that so that we all have to work collectively too. It's fair to say it is a mixed picture at present, and there is room for improvement. We have the good and the bad, so we have to build on and address some of those issues. The Council has stepped up to the mark in some ways and made a direct investment to address those challenges. The Innovation Factory is one of those elements. Those who go there tomorrow will see that. But we are investing in a wider programme of support with university and college partners and community-based organisations to look at increasing both the volume and value of business starts in the city. And I suppose in terms of the Innovation Factory, I would just make the point that that solution reflects the local landscape. It's about its place. If we had put that in the city centre, it may have been a different solution. So it's part of the jigsaw. It's not the solution. It's not the panacea to our challenges. And as we move forward, some of you may be aware of city deal solutions that other parts of the UK have access. So Belfast itself is looking at a city deal, and there are a number of themes within that, and they include innovation, infrastructure and skills. So clearly, you know, this area of work will be, again, at the core of that. And what the city deal will allow us to do, if we're successful, is look at a kind of long-term planning solution to address these challenges that I had identified, because it's clear that they won't change overnight. So it's a sustained programme of investment to allow the change to happen. So that'll frame the scale of our ambition going forward. So that's me. So thanks again, and hopefully you enjoy your few days at the conference, and welcome to Belfast.
Thanks, Lisa. I really appreciate your introduction. Those of you that were at the welcome reception last night will have heard me refer to some of this material before, but for many of you who are just joining us, let me just make a point. There are some parts of Belfast where there are, sadly, very deep divisions, where communities live apart. And as I mentioned last night, if there's anybody from Cyprus here, you will know that in Nicosia there is a peace wall. Well, there's one in Belfast as well. And I think to really, not to over-dramatise it, but the location of the Innovation Factory is really at the heart of where this divide happens. Okay? So those of you that choose, some of you will be coming from countries where you may well be experiencing similar types of divisions or borders to the way in which people think and act and relate to each other, which get in the way of enterprise. And the Innovation Factory is just that, an innovative attempt to respond to some of those challenges. And certainly it would be worthwhile for some of you who may be interested in seeing how those are being, well, challenged to take a tour to that. And I know that there's an opportunity for you to do that. But let me move on now to our first keynote speaker. To try to summarize this lady's career would be a travesty, because I couldn't do it in the few seconds that I've got. Barbara is a good friend to me, a great supporter. She is full, I'm not sure, should I put this up here? I'm going to get it absolutely correct. It's very important that we do this. and unfortunately, of course, I'm as blind as a bat, so I need to put on my glasses to do it. Deloitte Professor in Management of Growth Enterprises at Telfer School of Management at Ottawa. She is an advisor to the Canadian government, particularly, I hope I'm getting this right, Barbara, in the area of women's issues, if I summarise it like that. And I talked last night about our need to get beyond bordered thinking. It's not just about Brexit, people. It's about us challenging borders in the way in which we approach research agendas. So I'm not going to say more than that, except to ask you to give a very warm welcome to Barbara, who's come to us from Canada. Barbara.
Well, good morning.
Good. Get that right there.
I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you, Porrick, and to see familiar faces and colleagues in the group. ISBE is an important organization. I'm keenly aware of that. It was at ISBE where I presented my first doctoral paper some 20 years ago in Paisley, Scotland. And so I see colleagues, I see friends, and I cannot underestimate the importance of this organization, particularly for the doctoral and the pre-doctoral students that are participating today. Since then, I've enjoyed an academic career. I've worked at 3 Canadian universities. I have founded 2 task forces on enterprise growth, and as Porrick mentioned, I've participated in a number of Canadian and international advisory groups. And so I thought I would spend a bit of time this morning talking about some of the lessons that I've learned from those experiences as they relate to border thinking. And I'll also talk about a couple of related initiatives that are going on in Canada that I'm proud of. And my intention is to get us to think about what our roles are as academics and the importance that we play in bridging bordered thinking in the various stakeholders that populate our entrepreneurial ecosystems. So our border, of course, is a geographic boundary. We all like definitions, so I'll call bordered thinking perspectives that reflect our own life experiences or perhaps our own paradigms of reality. And I think it's really important to think about bordered thinking, certainly not only because of Brexit, but within our own academic communities where we're increasingly under pressure to produce academic outcomes as prescribed by accreditation standards, and that includes impact scores and journal rankings. And that kind of criteria begins to change the geography or perhaps the academic border from how we are working. It certainly is changing that of young scholars. That is, to remain bordered. Oh, what happened here? I guess rather than to engage with others. So in preparing my remarks, I was thinking of the poem by Robert Frost. He's an American philosopher and poet some 50 years ago. And this is quite a famous poem that many Canadian high school students are familiar with, Mending Wall. 3 lines from that work. In the poem, Frost listens to a neighbor who suggests that good borders make good neighbors. And he rebukes this comment by saying we must be mindful about what borders wall in or wall out. And like fences, borders and bordered thinking wall in and wall out. Victor Davis Hanson, who's a fellow at the Stanford University Hoover Institute, a military historian, takes a very different perspective on that when he talks about border discourse and post-borderism. And I don't know if this is what ICSB was thinking about when they wrote the theme, but here we are in academe. What Hanson was trying to get across, and he's doing that in political ways, is arguing that borders demarcate, that something on one side is different than that lies on the other, and that it's a natural instinct or human desire to be distinct and to separate. And I quote, "Emphasizing diversity has been the pitfall, not the strength, of nations throughout history." So very different continuum of perspectives about the value of bordered thinking and prosperity. And we're witnessing that with the thinning and thickening of trade borders. So in my comments, I'm going to focus on trade, gender, and immigration. For example, thinning of trade borders. This year, Canada signed with the EU the CETA agreement, Canada-EU Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement. And what this agreement does for our small businesses is erases about 98% of the trade tariffs for moving goods and service across borders, recognizing regulated professionals, and facilitating the mobility of talent across the Atlantic. For SMEs, CETA, for the first time in Canadian and European history, offers the opportunity to access government contracts at all levels of government. And this is a profound change because that's bringing them right down to the municipal area. But of more concern for Canadians is the thickening of trade borders with our largest trade partner, as Canada, Mexico, and the US are currently engaged in NAFTA negotiations. And the only good news coming out of those trade negotiations for Canadians at this time is that they've agreed to stay at the table. Canada and the US are indeed in a trade war. While Canadians and Northern Ireland feel the impact of protectionism, and I'm referring, of course, to the recent announcement by the Department of Commerce to impose a 300% shock tariff on the Bombardier C-Series, Bombardier being a Montreal-based firm, and a product, the jets being manufactured in Belfast. And this morning, we're feeling the impact of thickening trade borders with the 4,100 Belfast workers of Bombardier. But geographic borders and trade borders are merely two fences. My scholarship is focused on gender, socially constructed border. Gender identity, gender equality are hot issues in Canada. For example, our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, garnered international headlines when he appointed a 50% female cabinet and a liberal representation of diversity. His slogan and his political position is diversity is our strength. And we're seeing this in a number of policies that are rippling through both our international and domestic SME policy framework. And here are a couple of examples. We introduced a feminist international assistance program. And what does that mean? The guts of it mean that adjudication criteria will look at the impact on girls and women. The slogan is growth that works for everyone. Why is this important for entrepreneurs? Well, in the international context, on the way to this conference, I was in Jordan, working with Jordanian partners in a Canadian mission. And we're working with INJAZ and a women's business organization to construct gender-sensitive entrepreneurship curricula. We'll also build, through Canadian funding, a women's accelerator. And I think if we can get it right in Jordan, if we can create gender-sensitive entrepreneurship curricula, we might get it right in Canada. In 2016, here's a couple of other examples. The Minister of Small Business announced that our Business Development Bank of Canada would be audited in terms of how gender-friendly it was. Also an announcement of $700 million in debt and $40 million in equity investment targeted to women entrepreneurs. Canada has proposed a gender equity chapter in the NAFTA agreements being negotiated, and we have signed a gender equality statement in a bilateral agreement with Chile. Within academia, we're seeing the impact of a lack of women in prestigious research chairs, and the Minister of Science has threatened quotas to ensure better representation. So, how does border thinking relate to academic research? Thickening borders not only restrain trade, they also restrain the exchange of ideas. Border thinking relates to the fact that last month, an Iranian-born Ph.D. student at the University of Ottawa could not attend the Diana Conference in Kansas City. Bordered thinking defeats opportunities to collaborate. And for entrepreneur, bordered thinking precludes the opportunity to cross borders, Canada to the US, and to exchange products and services, and these are the heart of factors that relate to economic prosperity. Walling in or walling out. To learn more about bordered thinking, the Telfer School of Management has undertaken a number of research studies around gender and entrepreneurship. And our work mirrors and builds on the work of ISBE colleagues such as Susan Marlowe and Colette Henry, Lene Foss, Colin Mason, Jackie Brierton. And what we have found in our research is consistent that there are significant differences in growth expectations, financial literacy and knowledge, ICT adoption, federal contracting, less likely to do business in all levels of government, and immigrant entrepreneurs. I mentioned I would speak about immigrant entrepreneurs because it's a hot issue for many economies. One of the studies we undertook was to look at the debate that is ongoing in terms of newcomers offer rich human resource experiences, or perhaps newcomers take jobs and put pressure on governance. We were interested to look at the impact of SME immigrant entrepreneurs to the Canadian economy. This is a large-scale piece of work, and what we found was when we looked at cohorts of immigrant and non-immigrant exporters and non-exporters, a key finding was that the highest performing group or cohort of SMEs were newcomers to Canada that exported. The lowest performing group were newcomers to Canada that did not export. So what are the lessons learned here? Well, obviously one lesson is that export-oriented, or those immigrants that can look beyond the Canadian borders, are producing the fastest rate of growth, which includes, of course, revenue and job creation. But we know that those who are unable to leverage their international acumen are the weakest in that cohort. So training is being mobilized to take advantage of trying to bolster this weaker performing group. Another point, though, is these folks are still creating jobs in the Canadian economy. And this is one of the reasons why the government is promoting an aggressive policy for newcomers. Newcomers that are coming to our country historically from Ireland and Northern Ireland, like my ancestors from County Monaghan and County Antrim. And so, more lessons learned. Let me pull these points together. Many of us research and teach about entrepreneurship. I believe that to enhance prosperity, academics, each of us, can play a more proactive role in building bridges across geographies, political, and other socially constructed borders. For example, an excellent example is the work of Colette Henry. Yesterday, we attended a workshop with 16 nations represented, looking at women's enterprise policy, engaging in community, not only as academics, but with policymakers. Another example from my own work is the National Task Force for Women's Business Growth. This was a 2-year initiative where we pulled together grassroots organizations, policymakers, and academics. Purpose: to create awareness, encourage policies, and promote collaboration. What did we learn? The 6 points that came from that were the need to develop a strategy, increase access to capital, ICT adoption of technology, focused on new markets, supplier diversity, including the federal government, contracting opportunities, and increased reporting. When we drilled down in this project, we also found that there was not a policy lever that we could not see could be enhanced by using a policy lens. And we can see the impact of this work now in some of the policy work that's being done in Canada. Another interesting thing about this, though, in the consultations, what I noticed is that the women entrepreneurs that we spoke to often spoke about economic development. Rarely was the concept of economic enhancement or empowerment discussed. And so I see that as the role of the academic, again, to bridge the interests of industry, government, and those that are not at the table. Finally, in reflecting back, I encourage you over the next few days to reflect on your presence, your academic interests, and how they can be deployed to bridge bordered thinking that will ultimately lead to supporting social and economic prosperity. Before I build a wall, I'd ask to know, is this not our responsibility? Is this not our job to ask, and in doing so, to challenge bordered thinking within ourselves and throughout entrepreneurial ecosystems? Many of us work from positions of privilege. We like to think we're independent and without an axe to grind. So how can each of us build community in other communities to strengthen our research, to cross walls and fences, and in doing so, to enhance the objectivity of our work, the impact of our work, and lend to economic prosperity? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Barbara. I really appreciate that. I was on the radio this morning doing a bit of an interview about the conference. So I'm a bit of a celebrity now, you know, so I just wanted to let you all know that. But the persistent question from the interviewer was in and around the issues about how Brexit, just to focus on that particular part of bordered thinking, might lead to uncertainty. And that was the issue that we discussed. And just to tune in on a little bit of what Barbara was saying, well, you know, I myself am working with colleagues in the European Union to develop a research proposal around H2020. And, you know, as we work on this, there's always that issue in the back of our minds of just how is this going to impact on our ambitions when post some date in 2019. So, and also University UK have identified that something like 5% of our students are from across the European Union, 50% of our staff from across the European Union, and there is a shed load of research money, as I've alluded to, which may be increasingly beyond our reach, despite the prospects of perhaps central government in the UK somehow chipping in and making it up. Not in a kind of fictional way, hopefully. I mean, actually, in making it up and making contributions. So I'm just tuning in. It's kind of it can hurt at a particularly local level. So moving on to our next speaker, I'm really privileged and pleased to introduce Professor Neil Gibson, a friend, a colleague at Ulster University Business School prior to his elevation to Ernst & Young, where he's now senior economist. He's an advisor to government. And myself, I'm trained as an economist as well, but somehow Neil makes it absolutely understandable even to people who don't know anything about economics. So, Neil, may I invite you to take the stand, and would you give him a warm welcome, please? You know? I want to get some question and answers in.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's a real privilege to be here to speak this morning. The last time I was in this venue was for a Christmas dinner, so it's nice to be back, and hopefully this session doesn't end the same way that Christmas dinner ended. So I'm going to speak for the next 20 minutes or so, really about not what you might expect, to give you a history of the border in Ireland, to give you a history or a lesson about what I think is going to happen in Brexit. What I'm going to do, although I'll touch on both, is to try and think about what, and it's really reflecting Barbara's comments, what we as a policy or as a research family can do better to have better conversations. You can think what you like about Brexit, and I'll give you some views on that. But one thing's for sure, the conversation about that vote was not very good. The sophistication of the arguments were not terrific. There were not a lot of people on the media or a lot of people speaking at events before the vote that might have changed somebody's mind. There's rather more after it. And the academic community has got a lot of criticism in the UK for being very opposed, in a general sense, to the move and being very indignant after the fact. My question is, how do we be more proactive, to Barbara's comments, about those issues before they happen, so that we don't end up as a family having the outside world thinking you're only cross now because it might affect your revenue? And that's not what an academic family should be upset about. We should be upset about, if we have strong views or opinions, that we should be helping to inform the debate. So really my talk, although clearly featuring borders, is a lot about how we have a better conversation. Because despite all the improvements in technology, I'm not convinced the conversation is better. And I'm worried that too many of us talk to ourselves. So I talk to senior business leaders about Brexit in my new job in EY. And academics, we have lots of academic conferences. I spoke at the Northern Ireland Economic Conference 2 weeks ago. I don't think there was a politician in the room. What possible chance have I got of influencing economic policy if they're not in the room? But I have to ask the question of myself, what's in my language, what's in my messaging, what's in the way that it's being delivered that's not making them feel they need to be there? It's no good me being indignant about what they're not doing. And then you realise that maybe if you go onto the media and do a lot of commentary to say that what's happening is not acceptable, that's not going to enamour you to actually being of any ability to influence. So yes, we need to say tough things, but we need to be able to have a better conversation about borders, because they are coming back. Despite the progress in the Canada-EU trade deal, there are more walls going up. There are more borders being built within regions and out with regions between countries than at any time in the past. That's a concern. The real question for us is why that's happening, and are we close enough to that issue? So I'm going to do 4 things. Surprisingly, the economics at the moment are not that bad globally, which makes it all the more surprising that more and more people are feeling unhappy with their lot. So if that's the case, then why are borders coming back? And then let's just think a little bit about just how different the world looks like, and think and try and empathise with how frightening that world looks like for many of the people who are not with us in this room today, the people who are not at the table, which was an excellent line that Barbara referred to. So it would be absolutely remiss of an economist not to start with the GDP chart. It brings a warm glow, I know, to all of your hearts. How you've got this far in the morning without a GDP chart, I just can't believe. This is the G20, plus Spain and Ireland have been sneaked in because of 2 of the regions that have struggled so badly during the Great Recession. You don't need to worry about the detail. Some interesting points. China back ahead of India there for the first time in a few years. You can see Ireland back up as one of the fastest growing, in fact, the fastest growing European economy. The most important message is all of the major economies are growing, and it's been a very long number of years since that's been happening. And that is not what was quite expected from the economic community. Brexit was going to lead to an immediate recession in the UK. It was a probability, according to the IMF, until they then published their forecast, and it wasn't a probability anymore. So that is again surprised. That we're in this period of so-called synchronous growth, in which economies are improving on the GDP measure, I hasten to add. Then why more borders? What in this picture is not good enough that's making people feel uncomfortable with their lot? And a lot of that's to do with distributional effects, which we're going to talk about. Whatever else I say today, we also must remember, I was worried that you wouldn't be able to read the charts, but it's the biggest screen I've ever seen, so it shouldn't be a problem. But there are some really important points here about just the volume of jobs, these are Oxford economics numbers, expected to be created. 10 million in the US, 95 million jobs in India. All of those developing economies, all of this job creation requires amenities, new ways to feed, new ways to provide energy, new ways to provide technology solutions. The opportunities for business are enormous, purely from the demographic, social and economic change that's going on around us. And sometimes we have to keep that in our mind when we get worried about what we hear about, whether it's a local government issue, whether it's a Brexit issue. The basic function of demand, the volume point, is compelling. But we are heavily indebted in many parts of the world. This is debt per person. So Ireland, fastest growing economy in Europe, terrific. But it's debt per person. This is from the How Much Money website, 67,000 euros. Its debt to GDP ratio has gone down, so it's got a big debt overhang, but it can afford to pay it. But these are quite large numbers. See Japan there and Singapore. Singapore, not considered a weak country. You can have debt, just as many in the room, I'm sure, do have, whether you have mortgages or whatever outstanding debts. If you've got a good income, that's fine. But what it does mean is that some countries, such as Ireland, cannot make the same solution to the next recession as it did to the last, i.e. pile on more debt. So the government are then having to be more cautious than you might hope they would be with the level of growth that they've had. And that suddenly resonates with me as an economist. Because when things are going well and there's money to be spent, who is going to give an important message about some of the underlying principles about what you should do when the sun is shining? That's not going to come from most people who are going to be at a political person's door. And it is incumbent on me in my profession to remind ourselves that there are some very big, fundamental, long-term investment decisions needed, whether it's in our education systems, whether it's in our physical infrastructure, that will be required. Yes, we're doing better, but it hasn't resolved all the problems that the Great Recession brought. I'm going to give you a little flavour for Northern Ireland, not too much, but just to give you a sense of where we are. 1.8 million people, roughly. GDP per person is about $30,000 US. That's somewhere, that ranks us about 33rd, 34th in the world. Somewhere between Trinidad and Tobago and Slovakia, if that helps you position us. But you know, Northern Ireland's never been between those two in a sentence before. You can buy a house at an average price at about £128,000 sterling. Average salary is about £25,000, roughly speaking. We currently don't have a local government. We did, but we currently don't. I was going to make a remark, but I see a video camera, so I won't. The past still clearly plays a piece. I'm not going to talk a lot about it today, but obviously in a place such as Northern Ireland, the past, the history that we've had, the troubles, etc., do cast a shadow over some of the economic and social policy choices we have to make. It still, on occasions, can be something we look back to frame some of the policy conversations that we have. We've got a fairly left-of-centre policy direction, so we have quite a lot of supports and aid and grant, and rather less of the sort of open-to-market forces piece. You know, even on Brexit, we kind of want to be open borders, but only with the ones that we're used to trading with. Don't really want free trade in general, because that might bring in competition. So there is a bit of a mixed economic view. Our biggest employers are retailing, then health, then manufacturing. You might see things like ICT very far down the list. They are growing rapidly, but we still remain an economy dominated by some of those more traditional industries. And incidentally, when I talk about technology later, that is one of the very interesting questions, is if technology is transforming healthcare and transforming retail and how we shop, then we need to think of what the employment opportunities for those people that work in those sectors might be. There's a big competitiveness report done by my colleagues in the Policy Centre. You can go and have a look at that if you wish, just to show where Northern Ireland sits. And effectively, our business environment's very strong globally. Our quality of life is extremely strong. I'm going to come back to that. But we do lack a little bit on some of the basic economic performance measures, things like productivity, where we sit about 15% behind the UK, or GDP per head, where we're about 25% behind the UK. And that tells you that subsistence money won't necessarily do enough to transform your economy. You need to make some rather more brave and innovative choices. This is always a fairly sobering number. Now, this would not be unusual for weaker performing regions, but Northern Ireland raises about 13 to 14 billion in taxes, and it spends about 24 billion. So it requires about 10 billion to maintain the standard of living. And that subvention or money comes across from Britain primarily. And that leads to a very much stronger standard of living than we would otherwise be able to support without that money. And it also, in my opinion, and this is a fairly controversial statement, has taken away some of the necessity to have some of the very mature conversations about how you grow your economy. If someone else will fund it, you probably are not as focused on, because you don't see the pain of not having the income, because it's coming from somewhere else. Now, there's no sense that Northern Ireland as a region should have to balance its books. One of the deals you have when you're in a union is that you do some of the things that the other regions can't do. So London can't do agriculture, it can't do call centre work. There's things it can't do, it's too expensive. And in return for us providing some of those things, or training people, or providing medical care, or whatever it might be, we in then return get sent some money to keep our standard of living higher. So it's an economic system that works. Incidentally, although we don't have time to talk about it, it's one of my great challenges with the European project. For however supportive I am of Europe and voted to remain, there are some real challenges in the European project, which effectively says West Germany can balance money with East Germany, but what it won't do is continually transfer money to Greece. So Greece has to balance its books. Well, that would be like in the UK saying to Northern Ireland to balance its books. That will keep you permanently poorer. That's a very difficult position to be in, and I think it will continue to cause some challenges going forward. But what a standard of living that money supports. We're the happiest region in the UK, constantly the happiest. We might get a lower corporation tax. Well, we might. We don't have an executive, hence the question mark had to be added to the chart. We're one of the friendliest countries in the world. Skilled workforce, 2 main universities, excellent FE college. 80% of investors have reinvested in Northern Ireland. We have a diverse sectoral mix. We have wonderful healthcare. Investors come to Northern Ireland and say, hold on, I can send my children to some of the best schools in the developed world for free. And not only can I get to the hospital and the A&E, I can pick which one to go to. I have 5 within half an hour of my house. Now, we might argue whether that's a great policy choice, but what it does do is provide a spectacular standard of living. When I was a director in Oxford, economics, global director, we used to have our conferences or our board meetings occasionally around the regions. We had them in our Belfast office. And they couldn't believe the standard and the quality and the staff that I had and why it was the fastest growing of their offices until they were actually here. And then they were even more staggered when they realised when we had the meeting in London, I could leave my house later than most of the people in the other UK offices could to get there. So good was the air and rail links. So it's a fantastic place to do business, but perhaps not quite punching at its true weight, really. We have recovered our losses from the recession, just about. Ireland, fastest growing economy, still doesn't have its jobs back. And that lies at the heart of why GDP isn't the effective measure and not the measure that politicians can hang their hat on. Because if you don't have that income or those jobs, it doesn't matter to you what the growth rate is. Employment is probably the most important measure. And we've had job growth in all sorts of sectors. Manufacturing, ICT, professional services. But it isn't only the city-led, high-end urban jobs. They're the heavy lifters of job growth. But there has been jobs in tourism, in care industries, a mixed portfolio of jobs. And that's important because we have a mixed portfolio of skills. And what we can't do is only have the jobs for the high-end STEM skill graduates, for example. They may lead the way, but they can't be the only show in town. So given all that backdrop, great quality of life, good performance, why on earth would we be in an environment in which borders are coming back and returning? Well, I don't expect you to read this chart. It's one of the sort of mega trend type charts. But the changes that globalization have brought, the demographic change has brought, that those millions of people, the more people in India, in Latin America, in the Asian continent, what technology is doing to sectors, to people's lives, and what a global market and access to global markets, an ability to see and experience other cultures has done to the world economy, perhaps more rapidly recently than in decades past. And technology is getting rid of industries and sectors. This is from an Osborne and Frey paper in 2013. It's changed a lot since then, but obviously you can see the nervousness as an EY spokesman speaking about the fact that 94% of accountants and auditors are expected to be automated out of existence. If you don't want automated out of existence, become a recreational therapist or a dentist, not a telemarketer or a retail salesperson. These are frightening numbers, not least because many of these jobs take up a huge chunk of our labour force. You saw earlier, it's Northern Ireland's biggest employer, retail. if your packages arrive by drone, if you shop online predominantly, what on earth does that say for Lisa and her colleagues? What a change that's going to have to mean for the rate space. Retail sales across the till is not going to be what they were, but yet they're our cash cow for the rates income. It has profound changes in our policy landscape and profound changes to the people who work in those sectors who are absolutely terrified that their job won't exist in 5 or 10 years' time. And having the culture to embrace that change, recognizing that the entrepreneur may speak a completely different language to the people who work for them, and finding ways to communicate that change is an opportunity. And for us, particularly in an entrepreneurial community, recognizing why that doesn't feel as exciting and as innovative and creative as we might find it, but seems absolutely terrifying. Working in the university as I was, as we went through a change management process, seeing how deeply nervous many of the staff were with the way organizations were having to change to embrace technology. We can think of the job opportunities in it, and the reason I'm harping about these issues is because it comes back to my point about why more people are feeling less comfortable with the lifestyle that they have than you might expect given the growth. This is 2014, out of date also. These are the top jobs in LinkedIn, which are a combination of Zumba instructors, which I had to Google what that was, Beachbody coaches, all lifestyle choices, allied to a whole load of data and analytical skills. There's a whole list of, and the latest one, that has jobs that I'd never even heard of. I didn't know what a scrum manager was, didn't know what a solutions architect was, neither have anything to do with construction or rugby. I didn't know what a data evangelist is, although I kind of like the sound of that one. I want to be a policy evangelist. I think that sounds cool. But these are whole new sectors. So parents who are talking to their children have no idea how to guide them in their career choices because they haven't a clue about what type of jobs these look like, what skills are needed, what shape they are, what nature they might be. And it is terrifying for many people, as exciting as it is for some. We're moving into an era of more part-time jobs, more self-employed work, more contracting work. That's creating new vulnerabilities, new stresses for people. People say, oh, I love the freedom of this, yeah, but I've still got to pay my mortgage. That's given a different emotional, a different challenge to them, making many of those people, and I have many friends in the consultancy entrepreneurs and working in the business, I think I'm going to take a job back in industry, just to take the stress out of it. That there are pressures there that we mustn't ignore. The wage data shows us what are the jobs, this is UK data over the last 5 years in which incomes have risen the most. Air traffic controllers, there's a shortage of skills there. Taxi drivers, second fastest growing income group. Who would have thought that? Why? Complete transformation of the sector, from taxi companies owning the revenues to the taxi drivers through Uber and other changes in Halo and changes to the business model. You'll see things like tailors and dressmakers might surprise you. The only things left are high-end niche products. That tells you things can be profitable in sectors we imagined, so we can't take that old sectoral approach. Well, if you're in this category, that will work. I see some of my Ken O'Neill and Sam Bridge and colleagues from Ulster who spend a lot of time thinking about, talking about these issues, about what those skills are in the individual and the way that they're thinking about. And sectors don't really work for the categorization of that. You can see some of the health sector jobs under the pressures, shelf fillers. I prefer the official classifications because I know what all of those are, so they're a bit easier to understand. So I'm conscious, we've only got about 5 minutes here, so I want to give enough time for questions, but I do want to bring the kind of thesis together here. So first of all, we have a slight problem in the economic theory and globalization. This wouldn't be economic theory's first problem it's run into in recent years, I may add. Ability to forecast would be one of them as a forecaster, in which almost every model you will see is a return to trend type market will cure all ills model. Got to understand the last 10 years have told us that's not exactly how the world operates. So economic theory, very basically, as someone who had the joy of teaching this for many a year, you specialize in what you're good at in country A, and country B specializes in what they're good at, and then you trade with each other. Perfect, you can do the math of it, you teach kids how to do it all, and you trade your sugar for his, used to be guns and butter, but that's not very PC now. So you trade different products and everybody ends up better off, and you can prove it easily mathematically. The trouble is, it treats all the people in that exercise as exactly the same. So to take the US example, the US may have moved into IT and knowledge industries and specialised, and that's great, and the economy's wealthier. But it moved the car production out of Detroit to another country. The people in Detroit are not working in the IT industries. People are not homogenous. You can't take them as one raw resource and say, well, I'm going to stop you as being a farmer and you're going to turn into a brain surgeon tomorrow. They are different skill sets. You also run the risk if the only thing you do suddenly becomes unpopular or no longer in demand. So you decide, what will I specialise in? Well, I'm going to specialise in high finance or accountancy or legal services. What happens if that gets automated away? And that's the only thing your country or region does. So you do need a balanced portfolio, but that goes against what the theory. And we all enjoyed the benefits of the early days of globalization. I was on a radio program once in which there was an item about Egypt. It was the Arab Spring and the challenges in Egypt at the time, and everyone around the panel was horrified about what was going on and things needed to change. The very next item was about inflation. And somebody actually said on the interview about the price of towels in Next. Other brands are available, but they made the point about how they were going up and it was very difficult. And nobody else in the panel could see the irony of the fact that the Egyptian cotton that was underpinning this product, the people in Egypt were partly upset because they didn't want to stay at the level of income that they were previously at. So people wanted the cheap jeans, the cheap beans, but what they didn't want was the standard of living to improve in those other countries, or at least they did, but they didn't want it to affect the price of the goods they were getting. So that means we haven't done a great job of educating people of exactly what happens in order for those things to get to their table. And we're losing a little bit of that. You know, I have two young children, well, not young now, but children just about to head to second school, and they haven't covered as much of this about how the world works as I would like them to have done, if I'm being honest. So they don't know how things get to their table. They don't have this feeling of what it means to be in a global world. This is Branko Milanovic's famous elephant chart, which is basically saying that these are the poorest in the world and the richest, and it basically says, these are his words, not mine. So basically over the last decade, everyone's got richer. So the poorer countries in the world are improving, and so are the super rich, but the squeezed middle are not, the American middle class as they refer to it. And it is this argument in this paper that's put forward a lot for a number of reasons why we have some of the election results and Brexit and Trump and all the things that have surprised many, and many liberal academics in particular finding some of those difficult to countance and understand. One of the reasons is this whole cohort that have seen people catching up and people getting further ahead, and that's felt deeply uncomfortable. Real incomes are still lower in the UK and Northern Ireland than they were a decade ago. In real terms, people are poorer. And fundamentally, we want to be global citizens, we want to care for our fellow citizens around the world, but fundamentally, people are most influenced by how they personally feel and how their personal finances are performing. That may not be the world we'd like to live in, but it is the reality. And we are, in many of the developed countries, poorer than we were a decade ago. You can take some quotes here, but one of the arguments has been that what's happening is we're becoming short-termist. We're worried about next year's figures, next year's stock price. We don't really care about the long run, so we're not investing in capacity or in staff training or in bringing on more people. We're worried at the big global corporate level of just getting a good set of figures next year. You will see terminology in the FT like, and BP's dividend may be cut next year for the first time. And really, you know, this is terrible. The dividend's the bit that's left when you've done all the investment things that you needed to do to secure your business's future. And yet, that's the metric that we're worried about. Can you pay a dividend? So maybe we've moved into this short-term capitalist world where we're not thinking enough about the long term. Trust levels are appalling. The people you most trust are your nurses. This is from Maury. Doctors, teachers. Used to be hairdressers were fifth, but they've moved down the list this year. So something has gone wrong in the hairdressing profession. You ask your hairdresser next week why they're no longer as trusted. You can now speak to your hairdresser or your clergy. You'll get the same answer, apparently. It amuses me no end that economists are exactly in the middle. So half the people believe them and half them don't. For any economist in the room, that's just such a setup for a brilliant economist joke. Nobody believes politicians, or government ministers, or journalists, or estate agents, or bankers. Local councillors aren't very good either. That's a problem. That means for many of those people, they're going to have to get the people down here to do the advocating for them. That means that if we're going to have to get more funding into the teaching and the nursing profession, we're going to have those professions tell the public where the money's going to have to come from for it. It's not going to be enough to say the NHS needs 350 million or universities need more fees. They're going to have to say who's it coming out of. At least with the fees conversation, you're saying who's paying. But they're going to have to get other people to advocate for them. And my argument, I've been a long way of getting to it, I suppose, is that the position of trust that we hold, this worries me. You can get a slide on the Ipsos Mori data bank of who trusted during the EU referendum, and academics come out well. But we're not on the list. And we should be. Why aren't we? Why wouldn't that be? I want to know where academics sit in terms of, is that where you would go to if you wanted an honest opinion? I hope it is. Technological change, disruption. We know there's huge progress in the world, but data is changing the whole way that we do business and in ways that we're finding it very difficult to deal with. It's making jobs redundant. It's requiring new skill sets on existing staff. Very, very challenging. And sometimes we talk about that change without thinking about the human cost of what that transformation brings. And I'm going to take one last topic to talk about, because I know you want to talk a little bit about Brexit. So if you ask in the survey, most people were concerned about migration, and we simply couldn't talk about it. Nobody could make the argument that there was a reason to control migration that was not anti-liberal, not racist, not anti-business. It was simply to do with the pace of change. If you bring more people to any place faster than your housing, your roads, your schools, or your hospitals can cope, you will create social tensions. Now, the argument to that might be, well, then you shouldn't do austerity and you should build more schools, roads, and hospitals. That's fine. But know what's going to happen if you bring people quicker than your society can cope. If the queues go up in A&E, or if you can't get your kids into the school, you will start to resent the people that you perceive have caused that. That's an awful place to be, and none of us would like to see that, but it happens. I'm doing a lot of press in Ireland at the moment as Chief Economist for Ireland to say, one of the most liberal and cosmopolitan countries in the world, learn your lesson from the Brexit vote. You will have to be able to accommodate the volume of change. Ha John Chang writes in his economics book about 23 things they don't tell you about capitalism. He says there is a migration policy, even the most liberal person, but you just don't recognise it. If you said tomorrow, is there anybody in the world who will come and drive taxis in Northern Ireland or in the UK for less than the price we currently pay them tomorrow? There'd be over 1 billion people would do it. And we would find that uncomfortable because we would have nowhere to house them. So there is a reason why you have to have a mature conversation about how quickly people can move from location A to location B. And we couldn't have it. And we ended up having a vote in which this was the dominant issue for the Leave party because they simply couldn't see any other solution. We didn't do a good enough job being in front of the issues of social change that was bringing. No good being horrified now. You can see the issues between Remain and Leave. You can access these slides. So leaving the EU, reduced migration were the big issues for the Leave voters. If that many people, that's the Brexit map, the dark areas being those who voted to leave. If that map looks that stark, we're definitely not fully understanding what's going on if this took us by surprise. If we as an academic family are so far away from the public that we don't know that many of the people were going to vote in that way. Now the vote, you can say all sorts of things quite rightly about the vote being a protest vote about something else, but we have to be better at engaging with the people who are not at the table. That's the challenge I face as a visiting prof. That's what a challenge I face with the business community saying, yes, like I know, and I hate to go back to Margaret Thatcher, but that's what got me into economics. When she said, before you ask me to write a cheque for this problem, ask yourself whose money it is. And we need to be thinking like that. We need to be thinking about where and what. So all that story I've given you about low trust, low income growth, all of that lies behind the fact that people don't think that this world is working well for them. Terrified about change, falling real incomes, worried about elderly care, worried about job prospects for their children. There is a lot of fear and nervousness about that we need to find ways to show people that change will only inspire new opportunities and new jobs. We have more borders. Kathy Gormley-Heenan in the university did a brilliant professorial lecture where she talked about and this article's from The Economist, Europe will soon have more physical barriers on its borders than it had during the Cold War. That's what's happening in response to these economic and social changes that we're not quite thinking through the outcomes of as well as we might. So for me, yes, borders are returning because of all of those factors I've talked about. We need to do better at educating people about the benefits, but we also need to recognise there's some challenge in this change. And maybe we don't have a right to just get richer every year because we got older. I was a deeply unpopular person in academic circles when I complained somewhat about the principle of automatic increments, which wouldn't be something I, as an economist, would be particularly comfortable with. Much more, every year I have to think that I'm doing more or better, and as you get older, you do get better at your job, so it should go hand in hand, but it can't be a given. If you don't know if your income's going up, but you know your costs are going to go up, you can kind of see what's going to happen, and you shouldn't be surprised when it comes. So those difficult conversations, how do we deal with pay in a globally competitive world where people are coming to do these jobs and tasks for less than perhaps we get paid to do them? These are real emotional and physical changes that we're going to see, but all of them present opportunities. They present opportunities for the academic family to help have better conversations about it, whether it's our social policy, our politics professors, our people who are doing research. How do we get those closer to the economics? I used to say when I was in the university, I can't imagine an economics degree in 5 years' time that doesn't have a psychology module in it, because we have to be closer to how people make their choices. If we're doing enterprise, then we need to find ways to get something into those courses to think about how it feels for the people that these worlds are changing, because we can't just treat it as, well, why does they don't see the benefits? Really, change is a nerve-wracking process. So we're going to see new business models. We're going to see new ways of doing things. We're going to need to find new ways to have conversations. We're going to have new ways to have civic meetings, discussions. We're going to have to run better civic meetings and lectures that people are inspired to go to. We're going to have to do all sorts of things, and all of that great news creates opportunities. So ending on a positive note, the world is getting wealthier, safer, more innovative. Not everywhere, not for everyone, but it is improving. The potential opportunities are endless. Driverless cars may put lots of people who drive cars or trucks out of business, but there's plenty of other things to be getting on with in the world. We need to inspire people that change is good. We need to think about all of those questions: aging population, regulation, understanding health and well-being better, understanding income distribution, how to change it, what tax policies are needed. It needs a whole, I can't get enough economists in the business that I do. I'll hire any good economist I can get. That tells me there are job opportunities out there, because these problems are thorny and difficult. And my closing message is, I think the conversation isn't good enough in the civic space. And I believe that we're needed more than ever to play a leading role. And when Paddy Nixon was crafting his new strategy, my most joyous day was when in one of the civic metrics, it said that we will have a demonstrable impact on economic and social policy around us. That was the most joyous day of my time as an academic. It is our job, I think, to help have a better conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Look, that was absolutely loaded with incredible ideas, and only 3 of them I want to just pick up. This idea that if we have strong views, then we need to make them known. As academics, we have the resources as researchers as well as educators to do that. The idea that we need to be communicating more effectively with those not at the table is a very important issue that we need to consider. And this issue of trust is also a particularly important one, I think. Look, we've pushed it a little bit into essentially your coffee break, and we're going to be starting the breakout sessions as well in another 25 minutes. But is it about right? I can see the man looking at me here. So however, I still want to give you an opportunity. If people feel that they have a question or a topic or a comment they want to make, I want to give you the chance to do that. I want to ask one of our colleagues in the orange t-shirts if we could get somebody up here to take a microphone, please. That would be really helpful. If you have a question or a comment, that would be really helpful here now. I'll just give it about 5 minutes. Rob, is that okay? And I'm hoping as well, while we have our assistant coming up, that if we don't get everybody to talk today, then as we go through the day, hopefully these 2 presentations have gone a long way to stimulate debates in over coffee break and over lunch. However, right now, is there anybody in the room who would like to make a comment or like to ask a question of any of our speakers at this point in time? Yep, please. You just say who you are and where you're coming from, please, will you?
Okay, thank you. My name is Kingsley, and I'm from Dublin. I'm doing my research in entrepreneurship, that's the umbrella. But my research mainly is looking at how ethnicity influences opportunity formation in the host country amongst immigrant entrepreneurs. But my question is, you said something about good conversation and why and how the politicians are mostly indignant to this area, especially in regards to what they are not doing. So my question is, how do you propose they can be invited, or a better way to get them to partake in good conversations in order to tackle this problem? Thank you.
I think that's a great question, because you have to always empathize with what the political life is. So we would often say, oh, the economics policy is not great. And then you're looking at that particular minister or councillor thinking, well, what frame of reference would you have for crafting that policy? So quite often my response to that question would be, you have to do the hard yards. So cheap criticism in the papers will be a problem. It's still okay, as long as you're offering something, as long as you're saying this is what needs done. And too often, certainly in the economics profession, the one I know, we would tell people how big the problem is, or we would tell them what's not working, but go no way to saying this is what your enterprise policy should look like. So you have to craft the solutions. You can't say we need better skills, we need more innovation. That's not going to work. You have to say, I need you to pass this law, this one, and this one. So you need to do some of the work for them. And then I think a lot of the background relationship building is important. Offering free courses to political leaders, or particularly young politicians who are just starting their career, to know that they can call upon the university system for help if they need it. They might be 10 years into their political career and have no relationship with the local universities. That's not great. So building relationships, particularly when they're young, to know that you're a safe place to pick up the phone and say, I'm not sure what to do with this enterprise question. Can you help me?
Yeah, I think I'll comment in terms of process. And one of the things that's worked well at the University of Ottawa is opening our doors and inviting stakeholders, including politicians, into closed-door meetings so that these are intimate conversations. And one of the reasons that works very well is it's remarkable how federal agencies don't talk to themselves. But when you leverage the opportunity to use university real estate to bring those communities together, politicians appreciate that. Again, because we're seen as not having an axe to grind.
Sorry. I suppose interesting that Ulster University has taken this on this mantle, being the civic university, which is interesting. And for us, being based in the city, it's a resource that needs to be used. But it is about being pragmatic and understanding where the politicians are coming from. Effectively, it's they're going to have to appeal to their electoral mandate, so you have to understand that, and that's going to happen every 4 or 5 years. But providing them with the information in a more rounded way, helping them really understand or get to the bottom, because very often the challenges that they're dealing with are very complex, yet the push is coming from a very local, very single focused issue or person who is lobbying them at their door. So it's working with them, empowering them, and providing them with the intelligence. And as you were saying, some of the young politicians who are coming through have a different mindset and are more open to engaging. So there is a role certainly there for the universities to work with them, I think.
We're looking for the prospects of entrepreneurial politicians.
Yeah.
Got to be good. Okay, any other questions or comments that anyone wants to make? Anybody?
Can I add to that though, Porrick? It's important. We still need to be the voice of criticism as well at times, and we need to be brave enough to be in. I found in my career in this, what you just need to know is that the politicians, you've got to build up that trust. And if I say that I'm critical of something, I've got a solution or I've got something to offer, or you're not going to hear about it and be surprised or doorstep by it, I'm going to look you in the eye and say, this is going to be challenging for you. This is what problems it presents. Now, this is how our next research is hopefully working on helping you. What they can't do is find out about it indirectly and be doorstep. So building up those relationships is the most important thing.
Yeah. Look, I think we really need to get off and get a cup of coffee and sort ourselves out. Can I just say thank you so much for your attendance here, and I ask you to please join me in a warm thanks to everybody in terms of our speakers. Downstairs in the exhibition hall, coffee and Mickeys are being served. So, and then breakout sessions start at 11 o'clock. Okay, thanks so much again, guys. Take care.
They tend to bring